Have you ever watched a film that feels simply on the surface, but slowly becomes darker, deeper, and more emotional the longer you think about it? That's exactly how I felt watching Peter and the Wolf. Based on Sergei Prokofiev's famous musical story, Peter and the Wolf is not just a children's tale about a boy, a bird, a duck, a cat, and a wolf. It's a story about fear, bravery, innocence, danger, and the moment a child is forced to face the real world. Today I'm reviewing Peter and the Wolf, looking at its story, animation, music, themes, and whether it still holds up as a film So let's get into it. Let's go for a brief background. Peter and the Wolf is based on the 1936 composition by Russian composer Sergei Prokofiev. The original piece was created to introduce children to the instruments of the orchestra, with each character represented by a different musical theme. Peter is usually represented by the strings, the bird by the flute, the duck by the oboe, the cat by the clarinet, the grandfather by the boson, the wolf by the horns, and the hunters by percussion. What makes the film version interesting is that it takes this well-known musical structure and gives it a more cinematic visual identity. Instead of relying only on narration and music, the film uses atmosphere, body, language, facial expression, and visual storytelling to bring the characters to life. And depending on the version you watch, especially the animated short film, the tone can feel surprisingly serious and even unsettling. Let's go to the plot summary. And a light spoiler. The story follows a young boy named Peter who lives with his grandfather near a forest. Peter is curious, energetic, and adventurous. His grandfather, on the other hand, is cautious and protective. He warns Peter about the dangers outside, especially the wolf that may be lurking nearby. But Peter, like many children, doesn't fully understand danger until he comes face to face with it. Throughout the story, we meet a bird, a duck, and a cat, each with their own personality. Their interactions feel playful at first, almost like a simple animal fable. But once the wolf enters the story, the mood changes completely. The film becomes tense, emotional, and much more dramatic. But Peter must decide whether to hide from the danger or confront it. And that decision is what gives the story its emotional power. What I really like about Peter and the Wolf is how simple the story is, but how much meaning it carries. It is a straightforward tale about a boy catching a wolf, but underneath that it feels like a story about growing up. Peter begins as a child who wants freedom. He wants to explore beyond the safety of the house and the rules of his grandfather. But the outside world is not just exciting, it is also dangerous. The wolf represents that danger. It is wild, unpredictable, and frightening. What makes the story work is that Peter is not the superhero. He's not powerful, he's not physically strong. His courage comes from his intelligence, his quick thinking, and his willingness to act when others are afraid. That makes him a very effective main character. The story also has a bittersweet feeling. It doesn't treat childhood as something perfectly safe or innocent. Instead, it shows that childhood includes fear, loss, curiosity, and courage. That gives the film more emotional weight than you might expect from a short animated story. Let's go to the character reviews. Peter is the heart of the film. He's brave, but not reckless, in a simple way. He feels like a real child, curious, stubborn, imaginative, and sometimes unaware of the consequences of his actions. His grandfather is also important because he represents protection and cautious. At first he may seem strict, but his fear comes from love. He understands that the danger of the world better than Peter does. Like every parent feels for their child. The animals are simple but memorable. The bird is lively and quick. The duck is more vulnerable and innocent. The cat is sneaky and watchful. Even though they don't speak, their moments and music give them personality. And then there's the wolf. The wolf is easily the most powerful presence in the film. It doesn't need to be overly exaggerated or cartoonishly evil. Its danger comes from how silent, focused, and natural it feels. The wolf is not a villain in the human sense, it's an animal following its instinct. That actually makes it more frightening. The wolf would act the same in the real world. He wouldn't talk or be evil, he would just follow his instincts. And that's what I like so much about this. Let's go to the animation and visual style. Visually, Peter and the Wolf is beautiful in a very distinctive way. The animation has a handmade quality that gives the film texture and personality. The characters don't feel polished in a generic way. They feel physical, expressive, and full of small details. The world of the film is also very atmospheric. The forest feels cold and mysterious. The house feels isolated. The outdoor spaces feel open but also dangerous. One of the strongest parts of the film is how it uses contrast. The scenes with Peter and the animals can feel playful and almost whimsical. But when the wolf appears, the visual tone becomes heavier. The camera movements, shadow, pacing, and character reactions all help suspense. The film understands that animation doesn't have to be loud or flashy to be powerful. Sometimes a small movement or a quiet pause can create more tension than a big action scene. Let's quick review the music. Of course you can't review Peter and the Wolf without talking about the music. The music is the soul of the story. Prokofiev's score is iconic because each character has a unique sound. This makes the film easy to follow even without much dialogue. You begin to recognize characters not just by how they look, but by how they sound. That is one of the most brilliant things about the piece. The music gives the story rhythm. It tells us when to feel playful, when to feel nervous, and when to feel danger approaching. The wolf's theme, in particular, is extremely effective. It feels heavy and threatening. When you hear it, you immediately understand that the mood has changed. The score also makes the film feel timeless. Even if the animation style or pacing may feel different from modern family films, the music still works beautifully. It gives the film a classic, almost fairy tale quality. Let's come to the themes and the meaning. One of the biggest themes in Peter and the Wolf is courage. The film doesn't present courage as the absence of fear. Peter is brave because he acts despite fear. That is an important difference. Another major theme is that relationship between childhood and danger. Peter wants independence. His grandfather wants safety. Both perspectives are understandable. The story does not simply say that adults are wrong or children are right. Instead, it shows that growing up means learning when to listen, when to question, and when to take responsibility. There's also a theme of nature versus control. The humans want to capture it. The animals live between these two worlds. This creates a moral complexity that makes the story more interesting than a basic good versus evil tale. Depending on how you interpret the ending, the film can feel triumphant, sad, or even comfortable or uncomfortable. And I think that ambiguity is one of its strengths. One of the most striking scenes in Peter and the Wolf is the moment where Peter looks directly at the captured wolf. The wolf is behind the cage, silent and still, and almost waiting. It doesn't growl wildly or throw itself around like a typical movie monster. Instead, it just watches Peter. That stillness makes the moment even more intense. Peter stands there looking at the wolf, and the scene feels like more than just a boy facing an animal. It feels like two outsiders recognizing each other. The wolf is trapped, but it doesn't look defeated. It feels powerful even inside the cage. And Peter, instead of being scared, seems to understand something in that moment. The adults see the wolf as a trophy, a danger, something to control, but Peter sees something else, a wild creature that refuses to be humiliated. That is what makes this scene so powerful. It almost feels like the wolf is silently saying, "Open the cage, let's fucking show them." And Peter says he understands. This moment gives the film a rebellious energy. It is no longer just about catching the wolf. It becomes about freedom, respect, and standing against the people who only see violence. The wolf waits. Peter looks at him, and for a second they are not enemies anymore. They are both trapped in different ways. The wolf by the cage, and Peter by the rules of the adult world. That quiet connection is one of the reasons this version of Peter and the Wolf feels darker, deeper, and much more emotional than a simple children's story. Let's come to the part what works the best. The best thing about Peter and the Wolf is its atmosphere. The film creates a strong emotional mood without needing a complicated plot. It trusts the audience to pay attention to music, movement, and silence. I also love how it introduces younger viewers to classic music in a way that feels natural. It doesn't feel like a lesson, it feels like a story. The animation is another major strength. It gives the film a unique identity and helps separate it from more conventional animated adaptations. And finally, the story itself is memorable, because it's simply and symbolic and emotionally direct. Let's come to the criticism and what could be better. That being said, Peter and the Wolf may not work for everyone. Some viewers might find the pacing slow, especially if they are used to fast modern animation. This is not a film filled with constant jokes, dialogue, or action. It is more patient and atmospheric. Also, younger children may find some scenes scary or sad, depending on the version. The wolf is genuinely threatening, and the story doesn't completely avoid darker emotions. Another possible issue is that the characters are simple. If you are looking for deep dialogue or complex character development, this film is not really built for that. But personally, I don't think that is a major flaw. The simplicity is part of the design. The film works more like a music fable than a traditional movie. Now let's come to my personal reaction. Personally, I found Peter and the Wolf surprisingly moving. I went into it experiencing a simple children's story, but what stood out to me was the emotional atmosphere. There's a quiet sadness underneath the adventure. Peter's bravery is inspiring, but the world around him feels harsh. That contrast makes the film stay with you. I also appreciate that the film does not over-explain itself. It lets the music and visual carry the meaning. That kind of storytelling feels rare, especially in animation and aimed at younger audiences. So is Peter and the Wolf worth watching? Yes, absolutely. It is a beautiful crafted adaptation of a classic musical story. It combines memorable music, expressive animation, and timeless themes about courage, fear, and growing up. It may be a bit slower and darker than some viewers expect, but that is also what makes it special. This is not just a film for children, it is a film that adults can appreciate too, especially if they enjoy visual storytelling, classic music, or animated films with deeper emotional layers. For me, Peter and the Wolf get a strong recommendation. I would give it a 8 or 7 out of 10. It is simple, haunting, beautiful, made, and still meaningful today. But what did you think of Peter and the Wolf? Did you see it as a children's story, coming-of-age tale, or something darker? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification for more film reviews. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.